So as with all the sessions, this is being recorded and there'll be a link later posted on the ECEPTS website. If you want to ask a question, make sure to click on the speaker view and rename yourself so we see your name in case you have something like an organization or some kind of funny name because you're borrowing your child's computer. It'll just make it easier when we call on people. If you do want to make a verbal comment or question, use the raise your hand button that's at the bottom. If you right click on, I think it's reactions or something like that. Or actually, no, that's wrong. You go, sorry, I'll say that again. You go in the, okay, now I've messed it up. Cam, can you help me out? What is it? What do they do in order to raise their hand?
Hi, everyone. If you'd like to raise your hand, you can do so in the bottom control panel of your Zoom client. It is now under the reactions location. It used to be in participants, but now it is under reactions.
Okay, that's why I got confused. Thank you. If you want to make a written comment or question, then just use the chat feature. Because we're in Zoom meeting and not Zoom webinar, there's no Q&A box. So we'll either take written comments and questions through chat or verbal comments and questions by raising your hand. And once you raise your hand and we call on you, then Cam, our tech wizard, will unmute you. Okay, so with that said, let me stop sharing. And let me go to, okay, now I've got gallery view. Whoops, I had gallery view. There, okay. So I can actually see some faces and some names. And I want to thank you for coming. This is, to me, this was the most experimental session because there's no topic. But apparently I'm the only one who's worried about that. So does somebody have, let me go to the chat box. Oh, actually, I wanted to make sort of one little introductory comment before we jump in. And this session really is meant to be exactly what it said. Open questions, just a chance for people to ask questions that are on their mind, whether it's things that have come up during the course of the conference or whether it's just something you've been struggling with that has to do with apprenticeships and early childhood. This is not Dr. Phil, but with that clarification. But one thing I wanted to share in the spirit of dispelling myths, we call this the secret sauce of the ECEPTS model. And I do think we have figured some things out that have made us particularly and consistently successful. But what I wanted to demystify is our sort of how we came to have the understanding we have of the apprenticeship system. So I was working in early childhood workforce development for a long time before I started working on apprenticeships. But I very much backed into the world of apprenticeship. And when we started working on apprenticeship, we didn't fully understand we were also backing into the world of workforce development. And one thing that went on, like when back before, what preceded ECEPTS was 4 years of working in partnership with SEIU while we tried all kinds of initial experiments and pilot projects that were really successful, but it was at the very beginning of what the workforce development and apprenticeship world now calls new and innovative sectors, work with new and innovative sectors. But I didn't realize at the time that it was as new as it was. So we received one of the first round of California Apprenticeship Initiative grants. And I would go to these meetings of all the grantees, and I just assumed that we were newcomers, but I thought everybody in the room had been there a long time. So when they would say things, the people up at the front of the room would ask, give some kind of presentation or whatever, I would find myself raising my hand and saying, well, what do you mean that's how you're going to do it? That doesn't make any sense, because I somehow thought they knew what they were doing. And I wasn't fully, I really didn't fully appreciate that they were all figuring it out and they were looking to all of us to help them. Once I figured that part out, I became a much friendlier person because I didn't come into every meeting with a chip on my shoulder, thinking that they were just purposely being difficult. So that's sort of one thing. And somebody said this on one of the panels, I can't remember when, but there isn't as much of an apprenticeship system as newcomers assume that there is. And it's one thing that's helpful to remember, that we are kind of making the rules. We are building a boat as we're rowing or something like that. And the upside to that is there's not a lot of history that you have to fight up against. A lot of times, if you just decide you want to do it a certain way, it's not completely true, but it's often true. You can be really innovative when there's not much already established. That's the upside to it. The other thing I wanted to mention and sort of demystify things is that I had certain advantages coming into this program, which are replicable and I think are worth highlighting. And then after I say these first couple comments, then we're going to open this thing up. But I had two advantages coming into this work. One was I had been a university professor for 10 years back in Illinois before I moved out to California. And because of that experience, I'm not intimidated by the higher education system. And I'm also fairly well informed about how the internal politics sometimes go and how the silos function and the attitudes that universities have towards community colleges and vice versa. Which meant that I didn't need to learn that whole world. I came in with some level of awareness and understanding of what that, I didn't understand career and technical ed, but that I could learn. I understood higher ed. And I think if you've never worked in higher ed, especially if you've been a student in higher ed, it can feel very intimidating. The second thing I had going for me is I had worked in early childhood for 25, 30 years at that point. So I knew the sector. And somebody said that in one of the panels that, early childhood has its own culture, its own language, its own concerns, its own fallback positions on certain issues. And if you know that, then you know who you're talking to and you know who you're talking about when you're trying to convey that to the workforce development world or to the apprenticeship world or to funders or to policymakers. And so I mention that because sometimes people are coming into the apprenticeship world because they're committed to apprenticeships. And somebody says, oh, early childhood seems to be a hot topic, let's do that. And I would say to you, that's fine, but you got to have somebody who has content expertise and experience with the sector you're trying to work with. I would not presume to go and try and build an apprenticeship for cybersecurity people or for advanced manufacturing or even for healthcare. I don't know that world. I don't know that work. And I think the same has to be said about early childhood. So if you are in a position where you're the head of apprenticeship, but you want to go into early childhood, that's fine, but hire someone who can be your project manager who knows early childhood. So those were the little notes I wanted to start off with. And with that, let me open this up to, let's see, I've got the participant list. I'm supposed to be able to see if people have their hands up. It doesn't look like. And I don't think there's anything in the chat. Okay, who wants to throw the first ball?
Hi, Randy. I have a question actually. It came up during lunch. Someone asked me, how do the bilingual apprenticeship programs work?
Okay. First, I have to say, we don't have great experience yet. We have years of experience now with working with populations for whom English isn't their first language and how to make an English dominant program work for them. So let me talk about that first and then more directly answer your question. What we've discovered is, it's sort of like with everything, you have to be really thoughtful and you have to actually talk to people and figure out what will work and what won't work. And so part of what we've done around language issues, I'll talk about some of the programs that went on in LA County back in the days when I was working in collaboration with SEIU, because that's where we had the most direct experience with this. And what we found was a couple of things. One, this is partly where the cohort model is so important because we didn't offer spontaneous translation during college classes. We didn't tell students they had to help each other, but they did. And they help each other in a couple of ways. One is they would actually do some spontaneous I have to back up for a second. For those programs, we did do a self-selection thing when people enrolled for the program. And we asked them if they thought they could handle taking courses in English. We explained that that's how it was going to work. And so that if they needed help, we had tried to find out what kind of help they needed. But so it was a fairly high bar. People had to at least feel comfortable to listen to a lecture in English and be able to read English textbooks. Even so, there were still enormous language issues. And so there were two ways that the cohort program benefited people. One was, like I said, they would just sort of help each other. informally and, translate a particular word, sit next to the person who they knew might need more help, that kind of thing, those who were more conversant. But the other thing is, students who were much more, comfortable with English would stop the instructor and say, there was one story in particular where she said, "Excuse me, I can understand you, but you are talking way too fast and using words that are way too big. You're going to have to simplify what you say and think about how to say it and be, cognizant of who this audience is." And that is that's part of the strength of the cohort model, because people really benefit from finding their voice and speaking up for each other and sort of working collectively, even around things like challenging the instructor. Another thing that we did was and we still do this idea of onboarding the instructors is really important, because the community colleges, in our case, those of you who aren't familiar with our work, almost all of our related supplemental instruction is college coursework. And the community colleges, when you tell them you want to have instructors who are really sensitive to the population and will be flexible in responding, not lowering the bar, but being thoughtful about how to adjust the bar. The community colleges will pretty much tell you, "Oh yeah, we know that, we do that all the time." But we know that's not true. And the community colleges, if they're being honest, they know that's not true either. They know that's not true as well, because look at the rates of dropping out of community college. Look at who succeeds and who doesn't. So we have kind of developed an informal, although we need to formalize it so that we can share it with other people, but a system of how do we onboard faculty? Part of it is explaining to them what it means to have an apprenticeship, because if their department chair just assigns them to teach the class and doesn't explain, that's a problem. Part of it is that they have to understand who their class is comprised of. And this goes beyond language. Like this also is when you're teaching a group of family childcare providers, and you as the instructor say, if you're late more than 5 minutes, I'm deducting points, and you don't understand that this is a family childcare provider who doesn't close their door till 6:30 and the class starts at 7. If she shows up late, it's because some parent didn't show up. So that kind of sensitivity. The other thing is, when we could, and we still do this, we will make sure that we hire instructors who, in most cases, speak Spanish. Because of course, if the instructor is bilingual and they can flip back and forth or answer a question that the student just didn't quite get in English, it makes things, it just makes everything so much easier. That's not always possible. And so, we sort of do the best we can. Okay, that's sort of in general. And one of my strong team members, Tara Enriquez, is on the line. So Tara, when I'm done, if you have anything you want to add to this particular question, I'm perfectly happy to hear what you have to say. But the one other thing I want to say first is, so now we have a program where we are recruiting an all Spanish speaking cohort. So we've made sure it's going to be a bilingual instructor. We're dealing with the ramifications, but I will have more to say a year from now about what did we actually learn from that? How did it impact the program design? I will tell you, one of the things we're going to do is do a training for all of the community-based organizations program staff, as well as the college staff, with one of the leaders in California, Dr. Marlene Zepeda, who's done an enormous amount of work around dual language learning, so that we can think about not only the issues that impact young children around dual language learning, but we can also think about the issues that impact the apprentices around dual language learning, around being a dual language person or more dominant in another language than English. So I don't think that's a very full answer, because we really are just sort of putting our toe in the water of a full monolingual non-English cohort. And so next year, like I said, we'll have more to say. The one other thing I would say is there are systemic problems. Now, I'm going to say something that I'm not sure I'm 100% right. I'll give you but I'll tell you as much as I understand. In California, well, here's what I always hear. In California, in the community college system, there's a rule that you can't offer a class in Spanish or any other language than English unless you're offering that exact same class, that same semester in English. Now, I think that's what the policy is, but I will tell you, I know of community colleges who've broken that rule. So that's why it confuses me, because evidently on an individual college basis, there's workarounds. My point is this: as a policy issue, if we're ever going to seriously contend with who is the early childhood workforce, this is an important issue, because if colleges were free to offer classes in whatever languages was, were demanded by the population they happen to, because it's not just Spanish. God, I was once at a meeting in a group of early childhood people in the South Bay. They were having this whole discussion about apprenticeships, and they never mentioned this issue of language or Spanish or anything. So I finally said to them, and I was fairly new to California at the time, I said, I don't get it. Why are you not talking about bilingual stuff and Spanish stuff? And they said, because in our classes, we usually have about 15 languages. The area they were in the South Bay is very different than LA, where it's often Spanish is the sort of the big thing. So this whole issue, it's not just about Spanish, it's not just about monolingual speakers, it's a complicated issue. That's as much as I can think to say. Tara, do you have anything you want to add?
Hi, Randi. I thought you did a great job, and I just wanted to say that anytime we can support people in their first language when they're first getting started, especially in those first few classes, it's just an easier on-ramp. And to me, the most important thing of all is this, that we're valuing that native language. It's a modeling to the teachers of how they're going to do that with their own dual language learners. And that's all I have. Thanks.
Right, thank you. There was something you said. Oh, I'll just throw this in as well, because it'll come up later probably. The issue of language is one thing, but there's another thing that comes up that's sort of closely associated, and that is a lot of people, English language speakers and people who are not, whose first language is not English, sometimes they can do fine in the child development classes. They can manage, they can hang in, they can do the reading. When they get to their general education classes is when you have a bigger challenge. And as program managers, that's also more challenging for us, because onboarding a child development instructor tends to be much easier than onboarding, a math instructor or a biology instructor who has no idea what we're talking about in terms of the issues that our folks, the challenges. They should have an idea, because our folks aren't that different than the rest of the community college population. But I'll just highlight that so that if any of you out there are facing that that challenge, you'll know you're not alone. That is a real challenge, but it's a worthy challenge, because we want people to be able to pass all their classes and earn their degrees, and some of that's going to mean meeting people halfway and not simply trying to make every square peg fit into what a university thinks of as a round hole, if that analogy held. Okay, good. Let's see. Ana Gutierrez. Let's see. Cam, can you unmute her?
Hello, my name is Ana Gutierrez, and I work at Chabot College.
Oh, good.
And we have a Spanish cohort. We have it for almost 20 years.
Can you talk about it?
Yep. It's really organized. The instructor is fully bilingual, and students complete their 4 basic classes. The first 2 classes are fully in English and Spanish, the material and also the class. And the following 2 classes are a combination of English and Spanish. Materials are in English, and the class is run in Spanish. Some of the presentations that students do in the class are in Spanish. And students are encouraged to take English second language. So it is really, really a structure. So we have been running the program for almost 20 years, and it's cohorts that I think last year or 2 years ago, the first cohort attained their AA degree. So it's been taking a long time. We have so many students completing the 4 basic classes, but getting an AA degree is another level, as you state.
And so Anna, when you say it's a cohort program, it's a cohort in terms of what? In terms of when they start and finish, or
Yep.
what defines the cohort?
Yep. They start always on the fall with one class. Spring, the second class, and basically runs for 2 years.
I see.
So, and they finish 4 basic classes, and they move exactly with the same instructor through the fall. And those classes are run on Saturday.
Got it. Got it. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Other questions?
It looks like Regina has a question.
Okay. Kim, can you unmute Regina?
She's unmuted.
Whoop. Looks like she's still muted. Oh,
Okay,
there.
I had to unmute myself.
Okay.
Hi, how are you? Good to see you.
Nice.
We talked off and on for the last couple of years or so, and I'm now at the point where I've got buy-in from my college. I've got buy-in from a few employers. I found a few instructors also are ready. How do I get started writing the proposal? Like, what do I do next?
Okay, so really the question isn't writing a proposal. I mean, if what you mean is how do you get funding, then yeah, there's usually some kind
I've even got buy-in from my dean that she has a strong workforce of funding for quite a bit of this.
Okay.
So
So-
what I want to do is strike while the iron's hot. So
Right.
what do I do now?
So let me reframe this question just a bit so that it's more universally applicable, because the question you're saying is, when you have all the resources and the ducks in a row, how do you go from that to having an apprenticeship program?
Exactly.
And I presume part of what you're asking is, and to having a registered apprenticeship program, which is significant. So let me talk for a minute about the role of the intermediary and what that is, because this too is something that is evolving in this state. And it sounds like from our panel this morning on the other models around the country, it's something that's also evolving around the country. The notion of an ECEPTS has now become an official intermediary, a recognized sector intermediary. Of course, their recognition doesn't really get you anything, but it's nice to be recognized. So the role of this is another one of those areas where we're making it up as we go because there's really no system yet. But the way I think of it is, intermediaries do 2 things. One is they provide the training and technical assistance to employers and or higher education, community colleges, universities, who want to do what Regina's talking about, who want to sit down and figure out, we want to do this. What's involved? What do you mean registered apprenticeship? What do you mean on-the-job training? Why do we have to involve employers? All those fundamental questions that people have to just learn to even get this kind of stuff going. And we provide that ongoing training and technical assistance. We help people understand the rules and the regulations. We help them understand what it means to engage employers and what those conversations have to look like. We help the employers understand what it means to negotiate and navigate the higher ed system and so forth. And help everyone sort of get in line so you could actually have a functional team with a program design that everybody buys into. And then we help to actually get that program launched, helping with figuring out recruitment plans and enrollment plans, and how do you do things like make sure people have enough English if that's an issue, things like that. What does it mean to onboard instructors? What are the other minefields you can avoid if somebody would just tell you, so you don't have to invent the wheel? And that's really the key, because if everyone had to invent this wheel, it's just ridiculous. It just doesn't make any sense. It's not practical. The other thing that we do as an intermediary is what's called sponsoring apprenticeships. And what that means is, so ECEPTS has now registered 4 apprenticeships with the California Division of Apprenticeship Standards and the Department of Labor, the US, the federal national. Which means, so for example, if Regina, I can't remember the name of your college, Santiago something.
Santiago Canyon College.
Santiago Canyon College, okay. If you were just to start a brand new apprenticeship and you said, I have an employer and we're going to do the college, we're going to provide the related supplemental instruction, Now what? If I wasn't able to help or somebody else wasn't able to help, the first thing you have to do is develop what's called the Apprenticeship Standards, which is really this, it's really kind of like a template, but you have to fill in all the specifics. The state has to know what's going to be the ratio of apprentices to what they call journeymen, what we call, coaches, mentors, whatever word we use. What is going to comprise your related supplemental instruction? What's the professional goal? What's your professional target? Are they going to get their AA? Are they going to get their associate teacher permit? And so forth. There's all these things you got to figure out. Well, you can do that, but again, it takes a lot of work to reinvent the wheel. Because ECEPTS is an apprenticeship sponsor, what happens is, let's say that, just for argument's sake, Regina, let's say you said, we want to develop this program and we want to develop it for them to earn their AA so that they can work in XYZ. And we already have an apprenticeship that does that. Then there is a way, with the way it works is that you then become one, it's not actually the college, it's the employer. I'm going to go back to this point in a second, but it's actually the employer that's the centerpiece, not the college. And sometimes the college is kind of the tail wagging the dog, but I'll go back to that in a second. But the idea is the employer would sign on as a new employer in the ECEPTS Early Educator Apprenticeship Program. When they do that, there's a form they sign, and that form lets them look at all the standards we've developed. And if they say, well, wait a minute, in your standards, you say that the, I can't think of the word, the, what's that period called when you're employed and your probation, that your probation period is 60 days. But in our agency, it's always strictly 90 days. On this form that you sign when you sign on to this apprenticeship, you get to say, we're going to do everything the ECEPTS standards say, except we're going to use 90 days for the probation period. Or we're going to use these 3 courses, even though in the standards it says we're going to use those 3 courses and so forth. So that the employer gets to actually put their imprint on the specifics of the program. So right now, or I should say as of August, we're going to have like 5 communities that are all offering the early educator, the ECEPTS Early Educator Apprenticeship. If those of you who were in the program, in the meeting this morning with the national panel, Pennsylvania has a similar structure. They have their set of standards that is then applied across the state, and it makes it much more efficient. And there's built-in flexibility for where it shouldn't be exactly cookie cutter. So that's the 2 roles of an intermediary. Now, the problem is we're only one small organization. At the moment, we don't even have 2 full-time employees. We have me and a bunch of part-time employees. So we have pretty much hit the wall on our capacity. But I'm hearing from more than one source, pretty reliable sources, that there is funding coming down from the federal government and through the workforce development system, and maybe through what Kim Johnson was talking about yesterday, to fund intermediaries. Because once I have more resources, then if Regina comes to me and says, we're ready, just let's work with us. We don't have to come up with the funds to be able to give you the time you're going to need, or it'll be something where we can absorb 2/3 of the cost and it only costs you X amount. Somebody has to pay somebody. We can't give away training and technical assistance for free. It's just that the world doesn't work that way. So we're really in the middle, not so much in the middle, maybe we're on the verge of solving this problem, but the capacity building for the world of intermediaries is partly where the bottleneck is on being able to expand apprenticeships more quickly. Since the governor of California wants 500,000 apprentices within, I think it's 8 or 9 years now, and right now we have 90, everybody knows that if they don't expand the capacity of intermediaries, they're never going to get to 500,000. So this will happen. The other thing I want to say, though, is because I know the project that Regina's talking about, if you came to me and said, we really want to do a project, well, let me just, I don't know, Regina, if you've changed what you're doing, but I'm going to pretend I know what you're talking about. Regina's been talking about trying to develop this apprenticeship to train paraprofessionals, see if I get this right, who work in special ed as the one-on-one aides. Is that right? Do I have that right?
Kind of. It's a training, early special I guess, people that work with special needs children have also have the child development training. Because right now, they just get a certification in their technical part, but they have no idea about child development, child growth and development. That just seems to me making it hard.
It's been a good idea since the beginning, but what I was trying to bring up is this. That program is not the same as what we've already registered. So in that case, it would mean we're actually going to write new standards and register an additional, like we have the home visitor apprenticeship. We have within our youth apprenticeship, we're developing this sort of human services track. And there's nothing that stops us from, what stops us, for me personally, or for ECEPTS as an organization, we're trying to establish the guardrails so we don't go mission drift too far. And I don't know about whether we would expand into special ed, for example. I do think, by the way, you should be in touch with Kathleen White, who may be on this call from City College of San Francisco, because they just registered an apprenticeship. It's not exactly what you're talking about, but it's close. And so again, once there's one, here's how it works in the world of apprenticeship. Once somebody registers an apprenticeship for whatever, for bricklayers, which is probably more common than early childhood at this point. Anyone, it's public, it's not like the documentation is private or proprietary. Anyone can go on the Division of Apprenticeship Standards website and download the standards that that group wrote for their bricklayers. And then you take those and you just see what about it you like and what about it you need to tweak, and you register your own. So again, and if you are going to, DAS has staff and they will assign someone to help you register an apprenticeship. It should work better than it works, and they're trying to strengthen that system. But what I'm saying that is like, we're not the only game in town. I don't want people to think we are. We're unique because we have sector expertise. But if you have all the elements, oh, Tracy, I'll get to you in 1 second. If you have all the elements of an apprenticeship and all you need is someone to talk you through how to register it and how to run it, contact the Division of Apprenticeship Standards and tell them that. Because I don't know if it's every county, every workforce development board, I can't remember how it's structured, but there's like 30, I don't know how many people around the state who work for the Division of Apprenticeship Standards, and their job is to help do that kind of work. So you sort of have that avenue as well. Tracy says, Tracy's from, well, actually, Tracy, can we just unmute you? Cam, can you unmute Tracy Burt? Whether or not she wants to be unmuted.
There's also some other questions in the chat.
Okay. All right, we'll get there.
There we go. Now I can unmute myself.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
so I'm working on the program that Randy talked about that Kathy and I have been working on developing for a few years. And we just had our standards approved for, it's ECE special ed. So, and we would like to do a separate one for special ed, like what you were talking about, and for the same reasons, basically. And right now we don't have the salary bumps effective in the district in San Francisco Unified that would allow us to create the apprenticeship. And so it's about negotiating with the union to get those kinds of benefits so that it would fit into the apprenticeship structure. So that's sort of that's our sticking point, but we have a group of people who's interested in working on it. So if we can get the union leadership interested in negotiating that or changing the contract, then we'll be able to move forward on that one.
So let me just, I'm going to go on to another question, but let me suggest that Tracy and Regina, that through the chat, you exchange contact information. At least they have a conversation and see if there's a place where you can sort of, because I will tell you, like these 4 colleges that we're working on with the early educator apprenticeship, and they will confirm to you that this is the truth. I am pushing them hard to start working together, not to see each other as competition, but to see each other as allies and sisters, because it's almost all women. Because we can learn from each other and we can avoid unnecessary mistakes. So that's always for the good.
I will do that, but now I have to go plug myself in. My battery's running low, so I don't lose you.
Okay, I'm going to mute you again. Okay, so I see there's some questions. Let's see. Tanya, there are so many opportunities for trainings. How is an apprenticeship compared to trainings and webinars? Oh, that's such a good question. So, well, first of all, trainings and webinars tend to be very short term. And especially, there's plenty of research to show that a one-off training is close to useless, in the sense that if you don't use that information, I'll take it out of the world of early childhood. I remember when I was a university professor, and like the computer, this dates me, but like email was a big thing, was a scary new thing that nobody had mastered. And they would send you to these trainings, like a one-day training on how to use Excel. And somehow the promise was you were going to be able to, after one day, you were going to know how to use Excel. All right, fast forward 20 years. And if you don't use Excel every day, and you don't sort of figure out some of the things it can do, one-day training is like, okay, now I know that there's a world of databases, but I know nothing. It's not that different. If you take a short-term training, if it's very specific, and you come back and talk about it over the couple of weeks or whatever, it's not that you can't learn anything, but there's a limit to what training, short-term or one-shot trainings can accomplish. And on that, webinars, it's just sort of one version of a training. What defines an apprenticeship is that it's not short-term. When somebody joins an apprenticeship, one of the requirements is you have to do a minimum of 2,000 on-the-job training hours, paid. And that means 1 year of full-time, 2 years of half-time, you can do the math. But it's way beyond any kind of just a training program. So it marries on-the-job training with related supplemental instruction. It doesn't divorce the two. Historically, there have been internships that are often unpaid, where you're doing on-the-job training. And then there's college, where you have nothing to do with the field. You're not in the field. And part of what apprenticeship does is earn and learn. You're doing those two things in concert, and that's important. The second thing is, an apprenticeship must, by definition, result in an industry recognized credential. So it's not just taking training for the sake of training. When you're done with that apprenticeship, you have earned whatever you were promised, whether it's an AA degree or an associate teacher permit or a master teacher permit or a BA. So that there's an endpoint. There's like I said, it's an industry recognized credential. It gets you something. And the third big thing is, an apprenticeship by definition means if you succeed at that apprenticeship, there's a job waiting for you at the other end. And people don't always understand that. In early childhood, we've had so much experience with training programs that it takes repeating that a couple times till it starts to sink in. If you're an electrician and you join an electrician's apprenticeship program, you know that when you're finished your apprenticeship, you finish on a Friday, and on Monday, you're a worker at that place who's been footing the bill for your apprenticeship for the last 18 months or whatever it is. We're doing the same thing here. And it means when you talk to employers about committing to this apprenticeship, they have to understand they're not just committing to taking these folks into their, under their wing as on-the-job training at the start of it or even later on. They're promising at the end, there's a job waiting for them. Now, it's really hard for early childhood people to say, well, yeah, in 3 years, I know I'll have room for 6 people. Like, who knows? Who knows what funding will be? Who knows what pandemics will hit that will cause you to close it altogether? So the way the wording is in the DOL language is it's sort of like the employer has to be intending, they have to give it their best shot. If it turned out that through unforeseen circumstances, they just couldn't hire that person, not because they didn't. If they don't succeed at the apprenticeship, that's a different question. I'm talking about they've succeeded and they've successfully completed it. So there's a little loophole there in case it doesn't work out. The other thing is more than one employer can sign on to an apprenticeship program. So ideally, if community college A is offering the related supplemental instruction for an apprenticeship, they've enrolled officially, let's say 6 employers. And each of those employers is committing to take, let's say, 3 or 4 students every year, something like that. At the end of it, it's not that if I did my on-the-job training with, at this site, but this site that's also part of the program has a space, it's fine for me to get a job there. For that matter, it's fine for me to get a job somewhere else. That's not even part of the apprenticeship, but that's on my own doing. But in other words, what I'm saying is you want as many employers as you can because it increases the chance that there'll be a job at the other end. But knowing that you're going to get paid for your on-the-job training, it's going to be braided with your formal instruction, which in our case is college coursework, and there's a job waiting for you at the other end. Those are 3 of the things that make in answer to Tanya's question, that make apprenticeship a really unique model of professional development compared to some of the things we've done in the past. Let me go on. So Brandy asks, can you be an intermediary in several states? I don't actually know the answer to that question, but I have two thoughts about it. One is, I hope I can explain this carefully or accurately. Most state, let's see, some percentage of half the states in the country have are registered, their apprenticeship system only registers with the national DOL. They don't have a state thing. So if you, I don't know what state, but let's say, you know, I don't know, let's say Kansas, I don't know. Let's say the state of Kansas, they only work with the Department of Labor's apprenticeship program. So there's no state thing. So if I'm someone who's trying to start an apprenticeship, I'm going to use the federal government's or the Department of Labor's standards, and I'm sort of answering to that office. But there'll be someone in Kansas who's working on the, you know, who represents the US DOL. And if I get my terminology right, it becomes the Kansas State Office of Apprenticeship. Other states have there's a different language, and that's what I always forget. It's some other acronym that means they have a state apprenticeship thing, but it's aligned with the federal. So they have both, but one feeds into the other. And I don't remember if some of them have a state, but not a federal. I forget. But California, being special, again, I'm going to hopefully get this right, but I'll get it mostly right. California's Office of Apprenticeship had a divorce from the, I don't know, some years ago. And so California's Division of Apprenticeship Standard is not part of the national system, which is why a lot of us with California Apprenticeship Initiative grants, you'll see in the RFP, it never mentions the DOL because they don't care if you register with the DOL. It's another world. But there's reasons to register with the DOL. In our case, we want our programs to be applicable beyond the borders of California. And sometimes there's federal funding, which you can't get if you're not registered. And a little known fact, but it's not a secret, is if you register with the DOL, if you're in California and you register with the DOL, there's a piece of paperwork, like a 2-page thing, and you fill this out, and then you get, once you've got DOL approval, you send the DOL approval packet with this 2-page letter, and it's sort of like, it's like being grandfathered. It's like the DAS will automatically approve you because you've already gotten the proof from the DOL. Sometimes they need like 1 or 2 little pieces of information. And I should have mentioned this when Regina asked her question, but there are other agencies nationally, and some work in certain regions, who can help you with this level of detail with the administrative data kind of stuff. Like we're now, the one we work with, I always forget what their initials stand for. It's the IAA, the Institute for Apprenticeships of America. Erin, is that right? I see Erin's on the line. Yeah. You know what I'm talking about? Is she listening? She may not be. Well, that's okay. Anyways, if you're interested, you can text me and I'll tell you what it is. I think it's IAA. Anyways, this is what they do around the country. They help all these programs figure out how to do their paperwork, figure out how to enter all the data they need to into the database, figure out how to keep tracking that data. So we're now subcontracting with them so that we can provide the technical assistance and do the administrative overview. But we have like we have sort of an in-house, except they're not in-house, data system. And they know all these rules that I've sort of almost understood, but not quite. Why was I mentioning all? Oh, so just to say that's another resource. You have to pay for those services, but believe me, they're worth it if you find the right people. And this group is really good. So again, if anybody wants more information on that, you can let me know. The other thing I was going to say in response to Brandy's question is that I do know there are states, well, I know there's this organization, you probably know who I'm talking about, I can't think of their name. In Wisconsin, there's some kind of a Head Start program. And they're like working in 7 states or something, but they're not doing apprenticeship. So that just may be because they're ambitious and they figured out how to work with more than one state. So I don't actually know whether you can be an intermediary. It probably has, but the reason I explained that whole thing about how these different states work is because what the answer to that question partly would reflect what system you're part of. Like if you're part of the DOL system, my hunch is it probably could, but I don't really know, but we could probably find out. So if people are particularly interested, or Brandy, if you're particularly interested, you and I can talk and we'll figure out what the answer to that question is and why you're asking it. Pam says, it would be nice if we could have consistent standards across the state. Yes, it would be. We are working in that direction. Like the early educator apprenticeship basically creates, we have two. One is called the associate teacher apprenticeship, and one is called the early, I think these are the right names now. One is called the early educator apprenticeship, and they are consistent. They are aiming to, so anyone who's part of an ECEPTS apprenticeship, it will be consistent across the state, allowing for local input where you need to make some changes, and that's as it should be. The home visitor apprenticeship that we created it with the intention of it being, we could scale it statewide the minute somebody steps up and says, we're going to fund this. So, but I don't know if Pam, if you want to come off mute, if you want to be unmuted, we can unmute you. I don't know if you were meaning just early childhood stuff, or if you were just thinking standards across the state, consistent standards across state, like in terms of all apprenticeships. Do you want to talk? Whoops, sorry, you're muted. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the special ed one, the early childhood special ed one, should have consistent standards across the state if other people are working on them in different locations. So there's one north, one south. I teach all those classes on 5 community college campuses over the years. So for me, it would be great buying into something like that and making sure that the classes that are offered meet the same standards. And the early educator ones too, make it easy for people so that they can just tap into what exists. And the standards that were developed are based on NAYC competencies and the California foundations and the frameworks. So it's not like they were created out of thin air. They're created to meet the systems in California that are probably very similar to other states.
Right. And as Pam knows, when we developed the Head Start program, we very intentionally aligned it with Head Start, which meant it was all about the BA, which in California, you don't need a BA to be a lead teacher, but in Head Start, that's become, the goal. And so as we develop all these systems, to the extent that there is professional consistency, then the apprenticeship should reflect that, in whether it's the competencies that it's based on, if we ever have national competencies. I mean, the good news is when we did like a crosswalk of competencies in the home visitor, it turned out that when you look at a crosswalk, there was like 90% overlap between all these various people's sets of competencies, which is, intuitively how it should be. Erin put in the chat box, the IAA, which is the Institute for American Apprenticeships, and she gave you the contact information. If you email them, tell them, they're actually here this weekend, I'm not sure, this week. Tell them that you heard about them from me, so they at least have an understanding of where you came from. And then set up a time to just talk with them to understand what they can do for you. Feel free also to contact me so that we can have a conversation before you make that call, just so you understand better what we're talking about. I know this is complicated and it's in the weeds. So anyways, okay, let's see. Who else has a question? I think we covered everything in the, let's see. So we didn't cover everything. Let's see. Tara, I'm surprised to hear that intermediaries are a bottleneck. Here in PA, I tend to think it's the higher education readiness to award credit. Okay, wait, Tara, can we unmute you so you can state this? Because I'm not quite getting everything in your question. Let's see where you are. Tara Dwyer. Cam, can you?
Hi there.
Oh, I see you. Okay, great.
So our IHEs do award credit for the on-the-job learning that is happening. I'm not sure if that's different from what your apprenticeship is doing, but that has taken a lot of time. And I think the progress we've made across the state has really kind of been dependent upon our IHEs to not only get on board, but to have the time and the effort and the support from their administrators to do that work. I'm just curious about how.
When you say they're giving credit, you're saying that in the course of the apprenticeship, they get the apprentices get some college credit for their on-the-job training. but they're also taking other courses, right? In other words,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah, so in our associates model, say, you know, there's 18 ECE credits and maybe, or there's 30 ECE credits, and 9 of those credits could be awarded through on-the-job learning. So there's
Right.
that, you know, that's support there.
right. Well, I don't know about all the programs. I know that it's Skyline, and I think Tina's on this call. Part of her model at Skyline College is when they're doing their summer, it's in particular during their summer, the summer part of their thing is when they're going to be able to use that. They call it something else. I forget what they call it in California, but they call it something that basically says on the job training or credit for on the job training or something like that. But again, it's like, you know, it's like 9 credits out of an AA degree. So it's not much. So that, you know, I mean, what it does is it lets, at least it gives them some acknowledgement, and it, you know, it saves them taking a couple more electives or something like that. But I'm not quite sure what the question is that you're asking about all that.
Well, basically, I think what our IHEs have been struggling with is they have to award a grade for it to be transferable into the 4-year degree, right? So they can't just like pass those credits. So how do you, if you have a coach who's on site and your IHE person might be like a mentor who visits, or they could have a community partner who does that. It's really just been like playing with the higher ed system to get to a place where they're willing to award credit for that and aligning all of the competencies. But
Right. That's right. Exactly. But IHE is Institution of Higher Education, in case folks don't know that. That's okay. And the other acronym you used, there was another one I don't know, doesn't matter. So yeah, I mean, if the community college system doesn't even include that in their system, then you're like out of luck, basically, or you're gonna, you know, it's gonna be a big battle to fight. Maybe they could get independent credit or something like that, but it's, you know, it's just gonna depend how flexible they are. As for being able to award a grade, though, I mean, everyone, including the community colleges, are all moving in the direction of competency-based assessment. And I would think you could either take, if you have a Pennsylvania state set of early childhood competencies or the NAUIC competencies or something, you know, develop a rubric so that they can actually show what they came in with, you know, rate them midway and rate them at the end. And as long as you can show competency, they could pass fail if you needed to in terms of it transferring, something like that. That's one that I have.
sure, thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. Somebody wants, so Tracy wants to know the definition of on-the-job training. Well, in an apprenticeship, it means 2,000 hours of paid work in the field for which you're being trained. So again, if you think of, wait a minute, I've got Tara pinned. So what you don't know is you're huge on my screen. I'm trying to figure out how to unpin you. Anyway, sorry, Zoom. Okay. You know, if you're an electrician, you're going to put basically you're going to work full time as an apprentice that first year. And when you're done with your apprenticeship. Now you're a journeyman or whatever they call that stuff. And now you go to work. So it's the same thing. So I'm not sure. Is there something more specific you're trying to get at here? Let's see. Can you, Cam, can you unmute? There you go.
Oh, I think I am unmuted. Thank you. I guess I'm just, it's just working, but it's not training. It's not like someone supervising them in training, or is that related to the mentor piece because they're going to have mentors?
No, it absolutely has to be supervised. Again, think about a traditional apprenticeship.
Okay.
They're working 9 to 5, learning to become an electrician, and they have a journeyman who is watching their every move, particularly in those fields where it's like they're working a forklift and they could, drop it on someone or something like that. You know what I mean? That's why workman's comp becomes a really important, one of the reasons we couldn't register our family childcare apprentices as an official apprenticeship, because they're small business owners. They don't qualify for workman's comp. Apprentices have to be able to get workman's comp. Just a little interesting fact. But anyhow, so no, it's required on the job. What's required is supervised on the job training. Now, in the world of early childhood, if you're in a good, sound program and you have a lead teacher who is basically your supervisor, that's fine. You could also have someone from the college because you're taking a internship, a practicum class or something like that. It could be any combination of things. We had one program where I won't name names, but the program really wasn't strong enough. And some of the lead teachers, we weren't comfortable with them being they were officially their supervisor from the center director's point of view, but in terms of learning and strengthening their skills. So we hired and paid independent, seasoned ECE professionals who were retired or who weren't working right now or whatever. And they did this coaching thing twice a month. And we used class. We didn't use it to assess people. We didn't, measure, assess like that, but we used it as the framework. So they would know what kind of, within the coaching, they were going to focus on the domains and the dimensions that are embedded in the class structure. It gave for a nice, as long as my thing on class is if you don't take it too seriously, it can be a really useful tool.
Yeah.
Some other time. But anyway, so yes, it is supervised on the job training. So somebody is watching what they're doing and making sure that their skills are getting built and that they're getting, and that when they're done with the apprenticeship, they are ready for that job for which they've been training.
Okay. So if they went in, I have some students applying for the apprenticeship right now that already have some early childhood units or are already working in the field, but then they also want to work at the district. But that would be okay if they had some experience already, or?
So when you set up your apprenticeship standards, people can have time grandfathered in. There's certain rules, which I am not going to be able to remember right now. There's certain limits to how much they can have grandfathered in, but it's written into the standards, like up to 600 hours. I mean, it can be quite a bit actually. And as long as you can document that they have those hours, then they don't have to do 2,000 hours of new hours. You know what I mean? They can have a certain amount grandfathered in. But even like, and Pam can talk about this. Pam has, at the YMCA, Pam has cohorts of people who are going after their BA. They are all incumbent workers. Some of them have been there for years, but now they're going to get their BA, which will get them a site supervisor credential and blah, blah, blah. They too have to be supervised. It doesn't matter how high in the hierarchy you are. It has to be supervised on the job training, because you're right. It's not just putting in the time. It's being trained.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Tina, do you want to talk about what you wrote in the, this is the problem is my knowing people on, I know exactly who's asking these questions. Can we unmute Tina Watts?
All right, here I am. Hi, everyone. So Randy's talking about, we are trying to capture full-time enrollment for our students through the use of cooperative education. And so it's limited in terms of how many times students can access it, but we felt it was important to include it as at least part of the early part of our course pathway, because we want students to be able to access financial aid resources, even though we know they don't have to pay for tuition and fees, but still to be able to access financial aid because many of our students use that to live, but also because it would allow them to receive units, transfer units for their work experience. So on the job training would be captured at least up to a certain, I want to say it's 16 units maximum of cooperative education. The other model that we're just starting to explore, and I honestly don't know much about it, is credit for prior learning. So that's something that was introduced through our veterans program, and we are exploring it as an option for certainly our incumbent folks, but our new students as well. And so we're going to try again and maximize the various systems within our district to try and do our best to help students expedite through the program.
Thank you. And again, so much of this is, we are all really, we're not reinventing the wheel, we're inventing the wheel. So figuring out the little loopholes in a college, and I don't know how it is around the rest of the country, but around California, you think there's a system of California community colleges. And in some ways there is, and in some ways, every college does things the way they want. And from the outsider's perspective, there's no way to know which is which. One college tells you, well, this is how we do it. Then you find out that's how everyone does it. Another college says, this is how everyone does it. And you find out that's only how they do it. So, figuring that out is part of the challenge and joy of being innovators. Okay, next question. Or comment. certain people on this call I'm thinking I should just call on to know what you're thinking, because I know the level of thinking you do.
Randy,
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
I have another question that came up during lunch. Do you know if there's such a thing as a transferable apprenticeship certification across states?
Oh, okay, I'll tell you the question I thought you were going to ask, then I'll ask. What I thought you were going to say is, can an apprentice kind of transfer from one apprenticeship to another? And the answer is yes. If we had someone, let's say at Skyline College, who was in Tina's early educator apprenticeship, and they were working at Center ABCD, and then they moved and they went to College of the Desert, and there happened to be an early educator apprenticeship there, they can actually move into that program. So there is some transferability. Actually, there's transferability from employer to employer, because they could be at Skyline College, but just decide they want to move, they move in the neighborhood, and this other employer is closer to them, let's say, as long as that employer is part of the registered apprenticeship. So there's that kind of transferability. The other question you're asking, such a good question. I have no idea. My hunch is, the system right now is so nascent, is that the right word? And so not, like it was so great to hear the panel this morning from the 4 different states. And you can tell if somebody wanted to do a dissertation, you could tell there's so many common themes and common questions and common solutions, but it's not united. It's not, there's no system. We've yet to get there. Pam's about to lead a national effort through the National Head Start Association, I think, to try and even begin to think about developing some kind of I've been saying since the beginning, if we want a national early child apprenticeship program, start with Head Start, because Head Start is in every community. Wouldn't that be amazing if we had a national Head Start apprenticeship program that was exactly the same in every state, allowing for the flexibility that might be required, right? Is that where we're heading, Pam? So anyways, so I don't know, Diana. The other thing that occurs to me is, like, from the world of education, when I was a professor in a college of education, if somebody moved from some state to Illinois and wanted to teach and wanted, whether their certification, like certain states have agreements about that. So if you came from a certain state, you were like usually you were completely, your credential was completely honored, but you had to take Illinois state history. That was always the thing, right? Because you came from, Michigan, and they didn't care about Illinois state history, whatever. But there were other states where there was no such agreement, and we actually had to go through their transcript and see what they were missing. And so the day we're even at that point would be such a future point of being well organized, you know what I mean? So I think it's a good question. I think probably it's aspirational at best. That's what I would think. Where is Brandy? Would you have more of a national picture than I do? Can we unmute Brandy Lawrence? Where did you go? Oh, there you are. Do you have any thoughts about that, Brandy, from what you know on the national perspective?
Well, that's why I asked the question. I mean, I think that, and Dana's question is a really good one too. I mean, that's what I'm trying to do is get smart and educated enough to be able to make recommendations so that the most stickiest widgets are, addressed by any kind of a national approach. I'm loving the idea of Head Start. The only problem is we all know how much of the population Head Start reaches. So we still have a vast amount of our kids, in other settings. So and provide educators. So, but the national perspective is such that I do think there's huge momentum. I mean, exactly what Dana said, but the mixture between the possibility for a free community college opportunity, coming at the very same time when there's a caregiver agenda, coming off the end of a pandemic. I mean, literally, I don't know that we could have a better perfect storm. So that's why I want to be as equipped and as ready as possible. And you and others who've gone before are our Sherpas. We have, we need the experience of where the rubber hits the road to be able to make this go well, because we're being asked to think about it at scale. And as you said, it's a very nascent endeavor for the early care and education field in general. And then we're going from 0 to 60 if this stuff comes down the pike.
Right.
That doesn't really answer your question, but.
Right. And but getting back to what you said about Head Start, it doesn't matter. Even if Head Start, first of all, yeah, as far as I know, Head Start's never been more than like 50% funded in terms of the number of children they should be able to, that qualify, right? Versus the number of children for whom there's funding. That's also a problem, right? But even if, if we had a really great model of a Head Start apprenticeship and people were adopting it all over the country, seems to me there'd also be programs all over the country who would say, well, we're not Head Start, but we love these standards. We're happy to go with this program. And that would be fine, right? So it would still be a step in the right direction by offering something that could be at least looked at around the country.
Absolutely no question about it. And it's also related to the question I asked earlier that you answered about whether you can be an intermediary across states, because that's what I'm thinking. I'm like, if we're going to go to 0 to 60, we need an infrastructure that isn't a one, that's not like 65 intermediaries in 50 states. So that's why.
And I want to also mention two things. I hope I can remember both of them before I forget both of them. One is when you talk about building, I know what the other one was, building infrastructure. So it is significant that we now have in the federal database of apprenticeable occupations, that's their language, we now have an early educator apprenticeable occupation. The significance of that is, it used to be, if you wanted an apprenticeship for early childhood teachers, you just couldn't register it nationally. There was no occupation in the database. There's occupations, I'm not kidding, for glass blowers. Honest to God, there's occupations for like crematorium workers. And there was nothing that you could find that was close enough that you could use it. So we invented it. And Pam and I worked on this. We had to get 12 program directors from around the country who would read the standards and say, yes, this makes sense. We had to get a national organization to put their stamp of approval, which Head Start did, and I think NAEYC ended up as well. So it's a huge deal that we just have this now. Anyone anywhere in this country can now develop and register an apprenticeship for early childhood teachers, because they're in the data. It's an approved, recognizable, or an apprenticeable occupation. It's recognized as an apprenticeable occupation. That's one thing. The other thing is, there is a bill there, there's a national apprenticeship bill that's being debated, but there's also an early educator apprenticeship that's being debated across the country. I'm pretty sure Patty Murray in Washington State, I think, is one of the sponsors, and I can't remember who else. Every so often I get emails that's tracking the development and the progress of those. So I don't know where that's going to all lead, because the question that Dana's posing is, it's a really great question, which is basically, how big of a moment is this from a federal funding perspective around apprenticeships? Yeah, and we know it's big, but nobody can answer that question quite yet. But I will tell you that I'm hearing things. I can't tell you some of the things I'm hearing because it's not public yet, but I will tell you I'm hearing good things about who some of the Department of Labor, the Department of Apprenticeship people are going to be working for this administration. And these people are right on the edge of understanding apprenticeship and innovative apprenticeship and apprenticeship for for low wage work, all the things we're concerned about. These are people who have been on the front lines and who understand these issues. So I do think, I don't know how soon it's going to happen, and the federal government moves a lot slower than I want, but I can understand why. It's a rather big undertaking. But I do think things are going to happen, and I don't know what that's going to mean. No, I don't think anybody knows yet quite what it means. So, and closely associated, I'll just mention this because I see that Macy's on this call, but closely associated to the whole conversation we're having is the idea of creating apprenticeships for teachers, as in K-12 teachers, because, the system for teacher preparation, well, in California, it's completely nuts, but I won't bore the people from outside of California with those details. But it still to me seems like a system from the 1950s or the 1960s, because for one thing, it presumes you can stop working for a semester and do student teaching or longer, right? In what world, right? So the idea of taking a teacher preparation program for K-12 teachers and framing it within a registered apprenticeship program, which would mean they have to get paid, supervised, all the whole thing, is a really, really good and important idea that could be a game changer in K-12 education. And I've begun having conversations with people here in California who want to think about this and want me to work with them. And what I've said is, again, I'm making these guardrails, but what I've said is, if you're willing to think about that kind of an apprenticeship for people who are going to teach up to 3rd grade, yes, count me in. I will work on that with you. We will develop something. We will figure this out. So I think within the next, couple of years, you're going to start seeing models for that too. And then maybe it'll be a hop, skip, and a jump for someone to go from their early childhood apprenticeship that culminated with an AA to a teacher training apprenticeship that culminates with maybe a BA and a credential, if that's someone who wants to teach, let's say, kindergarten to 3rd grade, something like that. Who knows? That's also where this whole question of an ECE credential comes in. But I think that's something on the horizon that's going to be interesting and, and good in the long run. Did Macy jump off? Did I scare her off? I don't think she's here anymore. Anyhow. Okay, let's see. There's 2 more messages. Oh, we got to go. Okay, let me just see what. Oh, good. Macy said, yes, that is the dream. Pam says, we have Head Start, but also state subsidized, which is what? Right. Right. Pam, do you want to explain why you wrote that? And that'll be the last comment. Unmute yourself. Okay.
Yeah, hi again. We started out as a Head Start apprenticeship with 3 tiers, and I think those of you have heard me enough through this conference saying we've got the entry level, the AA level, and the BA level. And it was designed around the fact that we're Head Start, but we're also state funded, so we need to meet the state requirements as well. So we aligned it with the permits. But when you're looking at state funding and Head Start funding, there's a ownership over your funding sources that don't like, the state doesn't like us to say we're just Head Start when we've got almost twice as much state money these days. So, we're an early educator apprenticeship, and that's who we are, and it can be used anywhere and meet both levels of requirements. But we're coming at it from the employer perspective more in terms of our workforce and the constant need for workforce. So a lot of you are coming out from the college place, and so we have to partner with the colleges to make this work. And I know there were some other people that were talking earlier about, how to make those connections in communities. So yeah, hopefully more discussion in the future. Thanks, Randy.
Yeah, exactly. And so with that, I'm going to make one closing comment and we'll wrap this up. And that is, in all that we've been talking about, I just want to reiterate one thing, which is the employer is central in this model. Historically, a lot of ECE professional development initiatives were all about training or all about college coursework. And employers were not necessarily even at the table because we were just looking at the learner. In an apprenticeship, you can't have an apprenticeship. A college cannot develop an apprenticeship and try and run it. They have to have employers or it's not an apprenticeship because you can't register it without at least one employer. And then you can register more and more employers as time goes on. And so what that means for the colleges is it means we break down the silo and that the colleges have to get to know the ECE employers in their community, and the community leaders, the program directors and so forth have to get to know the people at their college. And this is, these are alliances that have been, they need to be there anyways. And yes, they're not easy. And yes, the community college system is insane. And yes, the, ECE employers are, eccentric. I mean, all of that is true. And that's the way it is. So, it's sort of like, that's the way it is. People have to learn to get along and they have to learn to partner and they have to learn to understand each other's culture and they have to learn to meet halfway. And it's not easy work, but it's really good work and it does move. And organizations like ECEPTS can play a role because we can come into a conversation between an employer and a community college and we can say, wait a minute, that's not true. We did it this way over here and it worked. Or did you know that the chancellor's office gave approval to do X, Y, or Z? And so partly because we have broader experience, we can also help navigate those conversations. And I shouldn't be, I hope that my sarcasm was taken in the spirit it was intended. It's not that I don't have respect for all the people we work with, but it often is surprising when you get closer to a industry you're not familiar with or an entity you're not familiar with. It's just shocking sometimes the barriers that you didn't expect to hit. So I'm just saying that so you go in with your eyes open. All this work is doable. We are making big progress, even though it's really kind of, staggered. I don't know if that's a good note to end on or not, but I want to thank people for coming. I really appreciate it. And you have my email address, and we would love to hear from you and follow up on these conversations. And I hope today has been really good and full. I will tell you tomorrow, we have 2 really important policy conversations. One about community colleges and getting career and technical ed to think about and include and prioritize the early childhood sectors or, child development programs and so forth. And the other 4 leaders of workforce development in California who are just going to have a fishbowl conversation like we had this morning about implicit bias. But this is going to be about, but the way they said it is, we're going to pretend we're having dinner at a conference, and we're going to be saying, so what do you think about ECEPTS? What do you think about early childhood? And we're just going to hear how they think about this. It should be fascinating. So I hope I will see you tomorrow, and have a good evening, and thank you.